Good afternoon, Bitcoin world. My name is Aiden Gillespie, and today I will be discussing Metaplanet and their updated PFIC status, what this means for US shareholders, and what this means for Metaplanet's stock. Quick disclaimer, none of this information is financial advice, and none of this information is tax advice. I am simply a guy on a computer who likes to do research and likes to think and likes to share that research and thoughts with you guys. Without further ado, let's get started with what a PFIC is. So to be classified as a PFIC or a passive foreign investment company, the company must have one of the following to be considered a PFIC. Either A, they have 75% or more of its gross income to be considered passive income, or 50% or more of the average value of the company's assets during the year must consist of assets that either produce or are held to produce passive income. One of those two things has to happen for a company to be considered a PFIC. What would be some harms that would happen to Metaplanet if it were to become a PFIC? Well, the main thing that comes to everyone's minds are taxation for the shareholder. So capital gains taxes would then be taxed as ordinary income rather than capital gains taxes, which would require shareholders in the US to pay more taxes. There's also some additional complications with filing taxes. You have to file an additional form with the IRS, Form 8621. And then additionally, there is potential for retroactive taxes on previous year's holdings, plus interest charges for any unpaid taxes on those theoretical retroactive taxes as well. So that could really harm somebody's tax burden too if they were being charged interest on any unpaid taxes because they were not paying that ordinary income tax that they were required to pay if Metaplanet were a PFIC. Why is there a harsh IRS treatment for PFICs? So PFICs are largely treated as tax avoidance instruments by the IRS, and this prevents investors from deferring taxes by holding passive income in foreign nations. And then it also helps encourage more investment into the US because it puts PFICs into alignment with other US investments. For example, if you're investing something that produces ordinary dividends, which are taxed as ordinary income, it would put PFICs into essentially the same tax alignment as those US investments that are providing things like ordinary dividends for that. So let's take a look at Metaplanet's updated PFIC status. So US legal and tax advisors recently concluded that Metaplanet is not expected to be classified as a PFIC for 2025 and for future years, assuming that the structure and business model remain the same. This does not guarantee that the IRS will agree with this conclusion. However, this is very good news, a green flag, and gives an extremely high likelihood that Metaplanet will not be classified as a PFIC. Personally, I don't think there was much reason to really believe that Metaplanet would have been a PFIC regardless, but this is just some extra little confirmation that really kind of gives us a pretty solid green light for Metaplanet to not be classified as a PFIC. So what does it mean for Metaplanet by not being classified as a PFIC? Well, one, it's going to provide a smaller tax risk and burden on US shareholders, and that could increase capital going into Metaplanet from the US because US investors may be more likely to put their money into Metaplanet when they don't see that tax risk of Metaplanet potentially being a PFIC or being worried about having an extra tax burden, encouraging them to put more money into Metaplanet. Personally, I think that tax reasons are not a good reason to stay out of Metaplanet. I think Metaplanet's going to do wonderful things and provide wonderful returns. So even if you have a little bit of a tax burden, I think the reward from Metaplanet far outweighs the risk. That's just my personal opinion on Metaplanet. Another benefit for not being a PFIC is that it will help Metaplanet maintain partnerships with institutional U.S. investors and promote future potential partnerships with institutional U.S. investors, which would allow more capital to still flow into Metaplanet to be able to buy more Bitcoin. So essentially, not being a PFIC for Metaplanet is simply going to allow U.S. institutional and retail investors. It's going to encourage them into investing more money into Metaplanet. So this is all really good news for Metaplanet and a huge green light. Now let's take a look at another case here of what if Metaplanet becomes classified as a PFIC in the future. First off, this I'd say based on what kind of has happened with that recent assessment, based on what Metaplanet is doing, I would think that there is a very high unlikelihood that Metaplanet would be classified as a PFIC in the future. But there are some potential things that you could do as a shareholder to kind of mitigate your risk. None of the information in this slide, again, as stated earlier, is financial or tax advice. I'm simply a guy on a computer who likes to do research and likes to think, and am simply sharing that research and thoughts with you. So one thing you could potentially do is mitigate your tax risk by using qualified electing fund elections. This could help to avoid the excess distribution rules, which would include retroactive tax and interest on that retroactive tax. Additionally, it can help reduce your tax burden as distributions from previously taxed amounts may be excluded from your income. So that would lower your income tax basis. However, one caveat with that is that it can only be done with a released annual information statement with earnings details from Metaplanet. And this also must be done within 1 year of Metaplanet becoming classified as a PFIC. Additionally, another way to mitigate your tax burden or tax risk if Metaplanet hypothetically became a PFIC in the future is through a mark-to-market election, which would, like the qualifying electing fund election, avoid excess distribution rules, including that retroactive tax and interest upon that retroactive tax. Again, I am not a tax advisor, not a financial advisor. This is not tax or financial advice. I'm simply a guy who has done some research and has thoughts, and I am sharing my research and my thoughts with you guys. That is all this is. This is not any advice whatsoever. With all that said, though, I'd say there is a pretty high unlikelihood that Metaplanet becomes classified as a PFIC in the future. But even if it does, there are some things that shareholders can do to mitigate their tax risk. There are alternative ways for Metaplanet to still be able to grow. The Metaplanet is not at all reliant on the U.S. They're not reliant on institutional investors from the U.S. I believe it's like 4 to 6% of shares are held by institutional U.S. investors. So regardless of whether or not Metaplanet becomes classified as a PFIC, I'd say this would not necessarily completely wipe away Metaplanet's whole business model and business structure and make Metaplanet unable to grow in the future. Metaplanet still is going to be able to expand even if they were classified as a PFIC. But by not being classified as a PFIC through this last assessment, or not being expected to be classified as a PFIC through this last assessment, this is just a really good green light for Metaplanet and is looking really good to be able to get more money from the US and to continue doing what they're doing. Everything is looking good so far for Metaplanet. Their share price has still been down a little bit. It's been a little bit stagnant, but with the recent Bitcoin buy that Metaplanet just did, with the recent news of this PFIC assessment that Metaplanet's not expected to become a PFI, to be classified as a PFIC. Everything, in my opinion, is looking great for Metaplanet, so I'm just excited to be along for this ride and to see where Metaplanet goes in the future. With all that said, that's all I have for you guys today. Thank you so much for watching. If you like this video, if you like the videos I've been putting out, please consider liking and subscribing to help support my work and to support the channel.